Hi you guys. I was going to do this as a live stream and share my screen as I'm going, but to be honest, I'm going to share a lot of screens, and so ultimately I decided to just do this as a pre-recorded video, and I will share it during a live stream where you guys can ask questions and then I can field them in follow-up. So I apologize, but sometimes it's easier for me to just do it this way. So what you have, or what you see in front of you, what I have in front of me, is the way in which we calculate jubilees. This is year by year from their beginning and how you establish which is the 50th year. I have been understanding that I need to go through this again, and I haven't really been putting it off. I just didn't really feel like I had a good time to do this. And then I got a comment today that was basically a representation of the elementary viewpoint of this. And I don't mean elementary to be like kindergarten level. I mean this is the understanding that you come to when you finally understand how the timeline is laid out. And it's the beginning point. But you have to be able to move past the beginning point into precision and refinement. You can't just say, oh, 50 times some number to get 6,000, and that's how many years of world history. It doesn't actually work technically precisely like that. If you're speaking in broad, general overview terms, maybe that'll work, just to give you an idea of how many years of world history there are approximately. But if you are looking for precise and accurate information, you cannot do that. So that is a very good introduction into this research, but it is not the end-all be-all, and it is definitely not a stopping point if you truly wish to derive answers. Where this came from originally was the timeline that I'm going to share here. And this is one of the ones on my academia page that I had scheduled to go through. This is in several of my books, and it was the data sets that I used in the calculation of my Jubilee timeline, and there are 10. So this is what it says, and this is called The Final Jubilee and an Overview of World History. And where we are going to go with this video, after understanding as comprehensively as we can about the Jubilees, how they're calculated, how they're structured, is we're going to take them back to creation. It is a mistake and a half to start at creation with the calculation of Jubilees and move forward, because there is a starting point given in the Bible, and it's not creation. You can take them back to creation, but if you try to start at creation, you will be wrong. Hands down, 100%, because that is not where the Bible tells you to start them. In the original Jubilee research, I presented 3 timelines, and these are in my book, The End Times Timeline, A Journey Through the End of Days, the Jubilee and Ezekiel's Temple, and Daniel's 70 Weeks. I have included these charts and this research several times where it was necessary to do so. And this is one of those timelines. And this is the one that I use when I discuss things. The other 2 I put in there because there were some sources that said that information could be viable. This is where I landed and what I typically reference. If you have listened to my videos, you will hear me talk about if 1406, then 2025. So we are going to come to understand why I say those things. Assuming an entry date into the promised land of Nisan 10, 1406 BC, and I say this is where the count begins, because that is where the Bible instructs the count to begin. This comes from Leviticus 25. When ye shall come into the land which I shall give you, then the land shall declare a Sabbath unto the Lord. 6 years thou shalt sow thy field and prune thy vineyard, gather in the fruits thereof, and the 7th year shall be a year of rest. Thou shalt number 7 Sabbaths of years unto thee. 7 times 7 years shall be unto thee 40 and 9 years, and in the 50th year hallow it and proclaim Jubilee. When did Israel come into their land where they could begin that count that they were commanded to observe when they came into their land? Joshua 4:19. They came up out of the Jordan on the 10th day of the 1st month and camped in Gilgal and the east border of Jericho. That is where this comes from. Nisan 10 is a hard-coded date in Scripture, and you will see that every reference point to Daniel's 70 weeks, whether it be the beginning or an ending of a period in there, will all have a Nisan, if not specifically a Nisan 10 date associated with them. That is hard-coded into prophecy. It's not going to change. The beginning of any week in any week of years, any Sabbath cycle for the land will be Nisan 10. The question I had was which year, and that is because I was not there to independently verify when Israel crossed from the Jordan into their promised land. Best case, best guess, best integrous research, 1406 BC. I used 1408, 1407, and 1406. If there is a year out there that people could possibly think, there will be a source that says it. So you have to look at reputable, reasonable, intelligent, logical sourcing. And you have to use as many data points as possible to substantiate everything. And if it doesn't all work, then none of it works. So if that date, then this would be the result. If Israel entered the promised land earlier or later, all years would shift accordingly. And again, that is why I had 3 data sets, this being the third. And I ended it where it's probably more reasonably likely that this is accurate. So, Jubilee since entry into the promised land until what event? What does 70 Jubilees represent? Now, one of the questions I've gotten is, how do we know 70? That is in the context of Daniel 9. He was in the 70 years of Babylonian captivity, receiving the vision of the 70 weeks, the 70th week of which will begin on the 70th Jubilee. But we're going to we're going to find another type in shadow in order to correlate that. That is not ever going to be stated in the direct text. It also has relationship to Psalm 90:10, which I've recently gone over, but the context of Daniel 9 is going to give you that information. The context of the situation, the scenario in which he received his vision and what the vision was all about. However, there is a double check system into that we are going to go through this evening, and that is the point of this video, is understanding how the Jubilees will, if you take them back to creation, give you a precise overlay of the entirety of world history from creation to kingdom. But we're going to build the case before we get there, so that all we need to do is use that as a double check. That is not the basis for our research. It is simply a double check system, and it is an interesting one at that. So these were the data points that I used. From 1 Kings or 2 Kings, it was the reign of Solomon. So I got this other nifty chart up here, which is a comprehensive Jubilee timeline. This is also on my academia page, and this is the scripture that tells us each of these data points and where they come from in the Bible. So Jewish kings were typically crowned on Passover, and we observe that of Jesus, the crown of thorns on Passover. That was type and shadow of when Jewish kings were traditionally crowned. That is pretty much the reason why they gave him the crown of thorns. In mockery, yes, but that was the day upon which Jewish kings were crowned. Solomon reigned from 970 to 930, and we learn that he reigned 40 years in 2 Chronicles 9:30. Solomon reigned in Jerusalem over all Israel 40 years. So we have that count. This is very precise. So I'm going to give you in this the data points that I used, but I'm actually going to count them year by year so that you can see the integrity of the research visually right in front of you. Here, you can see 40 years counted out. There are, from here to here, 40 years. That's what that number there shows. So if we assume that the head of the year was Nisan 1, and they began and ended their reign on Nisan 14, then you are technically in the 41st year, 14 days into the 41st year when they would crown a new king. So you're minus 14 days into the first year, from Nisan 1 to Nisan 14, when he's crowned, and then you're plus that into the 41st year, so an even 40. The next data point that I used here is the beginning of the construction of Solomon's temple. And I have a dishwasher going in the background, so I'm actually going to pause this video and return when it's quieter. All right, I am back. Sorry about that. It was just a little bit too noisy, and I thought, well, I can wait a few minutes. So we're going to the next data point here. We have the beginning and ending of Solomon's reign. That is important because we are given another data point as far as when he began to build his temple. And that was 967 BC. How do we derive that date? From 1 Kings 6:1. It came to pass in the 480th year after the children of Israel were come out of the land of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, in the month Ziph, which is the 2nd month, that he began to build the house of the Lord. So if we say that Solomon began his reign in 970, then 967 would be the 4th year of his reign, and that is the year he began to build the temple. The second data point that we gain from that verse is that year was also the 480th year after the children of Israel came out of Egypt. So we have this other chart here, and I will make it bigger. So this is the 4th year of Solomon's reign from up here, and we have another chart that takes us to year 480, because it doesn't say after 480 years, like in the 481st. It says it came to pass in the 480th year. So this year is going to be the 480th from a specific point. And that takes us to 1446. That takes us to, we go back here, the entry point, or the other data points down here. The Exodus from Egypt, 1446 BC. Yes, that correlates to 967 being the 480th year after the children of Israel came out of Egypt, was 1446. And how long did they wander in the wilderness? 40 years before they enter their promised land. Speak unto the children of Israel. No. Numbers 14:34. After the number of the days in which ye search the land, even 40 days, each day for a year shall ye bear your iniquities, even 40 years, and ye shall know my breach of promise. So from this year to the 40th year after that, 1406, they were wandering in the wilderness. And then they came up out of the Jordan on the 10th day of the first month and camped in Gilgal in the east border of Jericho. That was the point at which they were commanded to begin a count. Leviticus 25:2. Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them, when ye come into the land which I shall give you, then the land shall keep a Sabbath unto the Lord. 6 years thou shalt sow thy field, prune thy vineyard, gather in the fruits thereof. The 7th year is a year of rest. Thou shalt number 7 Sabbaths of years unto thee. The space of 7 years shall be unto thee 49 years. And in the 50th year, hallow it and proclaim Jubilee. This is a chart, how to count Jubilees. Now, I actually created this on the front end because I wasn't sure what I was going to go through. But 1406, and you can see, this is numbered 7 over here, so you have 7 sevens. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Thou shalt number 7 Sabbaths of years. They shall be unto thee 49 years, and in the 50th year, hallow it and proclaim Jubilee. So this would be the first year of the next set of 7 sevens. And then the next 50th year is 1308 BC. If they came into the promised land in 1406, then your Jubilees are 1357 and 1308, and every current year plus or minus 49. It is not plus or minus 50. Like I said on the beginning of this video, it is a great place to start for a general overview that you would count by 50s and approximate 6,000 years of world history. But there are not 6,000 years of world history, and we don't count by 50s. We count by 49s. As you can plainly see here, these numbers are not 50 apart. They are 49 apart. To get to the next 50th year, it is current year plus or minus 49. There are not 120 Jubilees, and they are not 50 years each, and they are not 6,000 years of world history. This is easily disprovable when you actually draw it out, and you will see that that is not precisely how it works. General overview, sure. But if you guys know around these parts, I don't do general. I do specific where it is possible to do so. So what you will observe here is that if this is our starting point, the first Jubilee would be there, and the 70th would be there, 2025. Now I have these years color-coded because there is a transition from BC to AD. And on one of the charts that I have, I always show this. So let me bring it up. This is another chart that I love using. It has way too much data on it for this conversation though at this point. So I'm just going to show a snippet. And this shows the transition from BC to AD. We saw it here from 34 BC to 16 AD. And we also see it, well, we saw it here. So let's explain it. Because we see it here too. How do we get from 83 minus 49, which is 34, to this number here? Because the difference between those is 50, not 49. So how do we get there? we counted out 7 sevens. From 34, our first Sabbath is 34 BC to 28 BC, 27 to 21, 20 to 14, 13 to 7, 6 to 1 BC. You will notice that right here is the transition from BC to AD, and there is no year 0. If you are converting these dates to Gregorian, or using, not even converting, but using a Gregorian calendar. I'm not using a Hebrew calendar at all. I could care less what the Hebrew years are here because that's not common understanding to me. Those years make no sense to me whatsoever. They're not relevant. Everything that I'm doing here is on a Gregorian calendar because it is easily recognizable. You don't have to do any conversion. If you are using the same calendar from start to finish, it doesn't matter what it correlates to on some other calendar. I'm not using some other calendar, not for any of this. I might be referencing specific months by day, like Nisan 10 or Tishri 10 or whatever, because that is the biblical part of it. But the years here, they didn't use a Gregorian calendar back then. This has all been converted to Gregorian since, and we understand years on a Gregorian calendar. This is one of the comments that I kind of hate, is when people say, well, they messed with the calendars and the calendars are all messed up. No, they're not. Because I'm only using one. I'm not using multiple. I'm not trying to convert from one to the other. I'm using one calendar, and numbers are numbers when they're counted up or down. That's very simple. Don't confuse the issue. Just understand what you need to understand about the calendar you're choosing to use. The calendar that I'm choosing to use does not have a year 0, so I can't, I have to take that out. So I go from 1 BC to 1 AD, and then I count up by single years. This, if you don't take 0 out, would be 15 AD. You have to take 0 out, so it is 16 AD. So that is how I calculate the transition from BC to AD, is I give you that transition so that you can see it right in front of you how we get there. So that is how that is. And then you literally just use the same method of counting up. And as you can see here, I did the very same thing here that I did on my Excel spreadsheet. And if you look at the formula bar, you'll just see -7s here, because that's, you know, this set, and this set's -7 from this set. That's how you count the years. This is going to be -49 from there, which, if you see here, it's that number, -49. Every single one of these formula bar, these here is -49, because that is to get to the 50th year. So again, I will say, general overview, you can count by 50s to approximate 6,000. But there are not precisely 6,000, and it is not specifically by 50, it's by 49s. So there's your transition. And then obviously here's your ending point right here, 2025. So you can do this any number of ways. I would very much suggest that if you are trying to figure this out for yourself, put it in a spreadsheet, because that'll make it clear. Just literally do it by hand yourself and you'll figure it out. So this took us from the Exodus from Egypt into the Promised Land, 1406. Now, there are other data points that I used here, and this takes us to this information that I also included in my research in my books. And this is the second set of data that takes us to Jubilee years. The reason that this is important is because I can say 1406 all I want, but if I don't have other years, which were, if I cannot isolate other events that happened in other Jubilee years to ensure the accuracy of the timeline, then it doesn't really matter what I say. You can't double check something if you don't have cross references. So I actually identified 2 other events in history that occurred in Jubilee years. Josiah's Great Passover, which occurred in this Jubilee year right here, 622, and the date of Ezekiel's vision, which is entirely pertinent to the end times. Now what you will see here is, I'll try to make it, can't really make it much bigger. What you will see here is the Babylonian captivity. There were four Judaic kings in view in the Babylonian captivity. There were 3 exiles of the Babylonian captivity until the totality of Israel was removed from, the totality of the Jews were removed from Israel and carted off captive. And that was when Solomon's temple, which began to be built in the 4th year of his reign, was destroyed, circa 586 BC. How do we get to that date? Well, we have a whole bunch of data points here where we use to get to that. The Battle of Carchemish was the first exile of the Babylonian captivity, and we find that from Jeremiah 46:2 and Daniel 1:1. That was circa 605 BC. I'm going to try to make this a little bigger. That was during Jehoiakim's reign, and he reigned for 11 years, and we gather that from 2 Kings 23:36. So all of the references are here. Next, after his 11 years, that was the transition from him to Jehoiakim, from Jehoiakim to Jehoiakim. No, there were 3 Judaic kings. That's what I thought. I second-guessed myself. From Jehoiakim to Jehoiakim. Well, Jehoiakim only reigned 3 months, and then he was deposed, and after him, Zedekiah. But the important part of Jehoiakim's reign was that was the second exile of the Babylonian captivity, Nisan of 597 BC. And that led into the 11 years of Zedekiah's reign. From that point to the third and final exile of the Babylonian captivity, which occurred in circa 586 BC. So the 3 relevant data points to the Babylonian captivity are 605, 597, and 586. What we learn from Ezekiel is down here in his verse that is central to understanding the timeline of Bible prophecy. In the 25th year of our captivity, in the beginning of the year, in the 10th day of the month, in the 14th year after that the city was smitten, in the selfsame day the hand of the Lord was upon me and brought me thither. What you'll learn about that is he was taken in a vision to the top of Mount Moriah to look down on the city of David to see where the temple was going to be rebuilt in the future and to prophesy about the precise dimensions of that temple for the Jews to build it post Gog and Magog. That's the gist of that. So it's important that you're given 4 different data points in there to very precisely pinpoint day, month, and year of Ezekiel's vision for day, month, and year that prophecy would be relevant in the future. And this is a pattern that God has established multiple times for multiple prophecies, is that the prophecy is given on a day for that same day in the future. This just happens to be on a day for that day in a certain type of year in the future. Ezekiel was in a Jubilee year prophesying about what would happen in the final Jubilee year, which happens to be the strength behind Daniel 9:27's covenant, the opening of seal 1, the measuring for Ezekiel's temple. So what you learn about here is that he was in the 25th year of our captivity. From the second captivity of the Babylonian captivity, second exile of the Babylonian captivity, 597 BC to 573 is the 25th year, which is also the 14th year after the city was smitten in 586. So that takes you to the precise year in which Ezekiel is receiving his prophecy. And he tells you he's on Nisan 10. So he is on Nisan 10 of 573 BC, prophesying about what will happen on Nisan 10 of the final Jubilee year, Nisan 10 of 2025. So this takes us back to our research, and this is all of the data points. Not only do we have the establishment of the timeline from the Exodus and Solomon and the beginning of Solomon's temple and all of that, we have other data points which fall on the timeline to validate that our timeline is in fact correct. And that would be Ezekiel's vision and Josiah's Great Passover. There is a wealth of information about Josiah's Great Passover that I did not include here, but it is written about in the books that are mentioned up here. So you can go through those references and learn about how Josiah's Great Passover has implication. So basically what that tells us is that from the commencement of the count, when you shall come into the land that I shall give you, then the land shall keep a Sabbath unto the Lord, 1406, 70 Jubilees later is Nisan 10 of 2025, and that is the commencement of the 70th week. And so this is what it looks like. Daniel's 70th week begins in a Jubilee year, and it ends 7 years later on Nisan 10, which is the day reserved for weeks of years. When you shall come into the land that I shall give you, then the land shall declare a Sabbath unto the Lord. 6 years thou shalt sow thy field, prune thy vineyard, gather in the fruits thereof. The 7th year shall be a year of rest. Thou shalt number 7 Sabbaths of years, they shall be unto thee 49 years. And in the 50th year hallow it and proclaim Jubilee. And they came up out of the Jordan on the 10th day of the first month and camped in Gilgal in the east border of Jericho. So that is the day upon which every single week of yours will begin, the 10th day of the first month, as cited here in Joshua 4:19. So Nisan 10, as I mentioned earlier, is hard-coded in Scripture. That will not change. The only thing that I am unsure of is specifically whether 1406 is accurate. All of the data points that I have here, could you shift them a year? Could you shift them 2 years? You cannot shift them indefinitely. They have to align in a very specific way. So I did that to the best of my ability, and I gave 3 ranges of years. One is past, one is coming up in 2 months, and the other is next year. I believe next year. I've always believed next year. That is why you will see that in the teaching that I do. Because I can't teach all of them, so if one, then another, I stick with one. And I say it could potentially shift because I wasn't there to verify it, so I'm not sure. But this is what I think. And I always use 1406 and I always use 2025 because that is what I think is accurate. So I just sneezed. I had to pause this. So this is basically what we wind up with. I closed the one that I needed. This is what we wind up with. Is from here to here, there's 70. But you can take that back and approximate creation. Now, this is the point of contention that I started off this video talking about, is you do not start with creation. You are not ever told in the Bible to start counting jubilees at creation. You are told to start counting them when Israel shall come into the land, because it is a count to the end times. Not backwards, but forwards. However, you can approximate creation by knowing how to count jubilees and how much of world history there should approximately be. This is the pattern that was established by God in his creative week, the pattern of the Sabbaths. God created for 6 days and then he rested on the 7th. That was written into the law for Israel in Exodus 20, one of the 10 commandments actually, to work 6 days and rest on the Sabbath. That was written into the law for the land, which we just talked about regarding the Sabbath cycles for the land and the Jubilee in Leviticus 25. And then it was written in the whole of human history in 2 Peter 3. That 1 day is with the Lord as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as 1 day. Where people get a little bit off course here is thinking that because 6 days and 7 days and 6 years and 7 years is precise, that 6,000 years is precise also. And yet it is not. It is an approximation. English grammar structures dictate that it would be because it is comparing something. It is not saying it is the same. It is saying that it is comparative, comparable. Is as. It does not say 1 day is 1,000 years and 1,000 years is 1 day. It says is as, which means it is similar to. It is similar enough to the pattern that you can draw a parallel, but it is not exact. When you understand that, is as. As is a comparative term. It's comparing similar things using like or as is a simile. Similes and metaphors are comparative language. You use them to help someone understand similarity between two things. That means that they would be familiar with one thing, and so you're drawing a parallel using that as your comparative tool to something else so somebody understands it. The Sabbath is how we understand the whole of human history because it is something understandable, 6 days with the 7th day being rest. But it's not exact, which is why it says is as. The structure is similar, not identical, but it is comparable enough so that you'll understand it. This is where we really need to pay attention to details. Is as, not is as. So when you use the method of counting forward, the same way to count forward, you count backward. 4003 BC is the closest thing you're going to get to 4,000, which gives you the closest number to 6,000 years of world history. We know that there's going to be 1,000 years of rest in the kingdom, so you would say, in the same likeness as the Sabbaths, where there are 6 days or 6 years of work, and in the 7th day or the 7th year is a year of rest or a day of rest, you would approximate that to the whole of human history, where there are approximately 6,000 years of world history and the rest in the kingdom for that 1,000 years. The closest number that you can get is here, 4003 BC. You notice here that there are not 120 Jubilees. You don't count by 50, and there are not 6,000 years of world history. The simplest thing that people can do to override suppositions like that and determine whether or not they are true or false is to just open a spreadsheet and type in some numbers. It's either going to work or it's not. And if it doesn't, that wasn't right. It's good for generalizations, but it's not good for accuracy or precision. So this is what it would look like, is if they enter the Promised Land in 1406 BC, and 2025 is the last Jubilee, the 70th, when they actually, when the 70th week begins, then you would go back to creation and you would find that there are actually 123 Jubilees through the whole of human history. Plus another 7 years. From here, there's going to be a 70th week, so there would be 6,034 years of world history. And this is where I'm going to take us through the pattern in the Mount. What we understand of this, and I don't even know how or why I found this, but I found this a long time ago, and this has been up here for a long time. People may not know what they're looking at, but this to me is fascinating, and this is our double check system. People say, how do we know 70? Because that was the context of Daniel. But how can we validate that? How can we double check it? In type and shadow. From Exodus 19 through Joshua 13, there is a precise overlay in type and shadow of world history in the periods of 40. So these are grayed out. What I'm going to ask you to do is take the actual years out and just look at the segments, the color coding. We have a benchmark event which begins the count of 40. And then there are 2. And then there is another count of 40, and there's a specific highlighted event which happens at the end of that period of 40. And then there's another period of 40, which ends with another event starting. This, in type and shadow, is the giving of the law on Sinai. Again, take out the years and just look at the pieces of color coding, because they denote periods of time and events. So we have the beginning of the law. This is the giving of the law on Sinai in Exodus 19. Then Moses was commanded to go up the mount 40 days. This is Exodus 24. So I'm going to kind of read along as we go through this, but the verses are down at the bottom for you. Exodus 24, verse 18, it says, "And Moses went up into the midst of the cloud, and gat him up in the mount, and Moses was in the mount 40 days and 40 nights. When Moses ended that 40 days and 40 nights, it was because they thought that the camp was being invaded and people were dying. This is in Exodus 32. When the people saw that Moses delayed to come down on the mount, the people gathered themselves together unto Aaron and said unto him, Up, make us gods, which shall go before us. For as for this Moses, the man that brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we wot not what is become of him." Now, just as a side note, 40. Think to yourselves, what is the number 40 related to in the Bible? Periods of trial or testing. Did Israel pass their period of trial or testing while Moses was away convening with God? No, they did not. And what happened as a result of that? Let's see. Continuing on in Exodus 32. The Lord said unto Moses, this is verse 7, Go get thee down, for thy people, which thou broughtest out of the land of Egypt, have corrupted themselves. They have turned aside quickly out of the way which I commanded them. They have made a molten calf, and have worshipped it, have sacrificed thereunto, and said, These be thy gods, O Israel, which have brought thee up out of the land of Egypt. So Moses and Joshua go down. Joshua heard the noise. This is verse 17 of chapter 32. Of the people as they shouted, he said unto Moses, There is noise of war in the camp. And he said, It is not the voice of them that shout for mastery, neither is it the voice of them that cry for being overcome, but the noise of them that do sing I hear. So Moses' anger waxed hot. He cast the tables out of his hand and brake them beneath the mount, signaling that the people who had just broken the law, they'd literally just gotten it from God. Moses was gone for a month, 10 days longer than a month, and they just fell to pieces while he was gone. And so he broke the tablets that God had given them, signaling that Israel was in the process of breaking the law. And then, if you go through the next couple of chapters, you will see that Moses was down the mount for 2 days dealing with the people, interceding on their behalf, cleaning up shop. The Levites were instructed to kill people. They slew thousands until people got the point. So there were 2 days that he was down the mountain to deal with the people. Similarly to the beginning of Exodus 19, where Moses and the people were commanded against the third day, be thou ready against the third day. This is kind of the same thing as this is another third day, where let's see, it's like a repeat, like it gets a redo. Exodus 19:1, in the third month, when the children of Israel were gone forth the land of Egypt, the same day they came into the wilderness of Sinai, for they were departed from Rephidim and were come to the desert of Sinai, had pitched in the wilderness, and Israel camped before the mount. Moses went up to God. The Lord called unto him out of the mountain, saying, Thus shalt thou say to the house of Jacob, tell to the children of Israel, Ye have seen what I did unto the Egyptians, and how I bare thee on eagle's wings, brought thee unto myself. Now therefore, if ye will obey my voice indeed, and keep my covenant, then ye shall be a peculiar treasure unto me above all people, for the earth is mine. Verse 10, the Lord said unto Moses, Go unto the people, and sanctify them today and tomorrow, and let them wash their clothes, and be ready against the third day. So the third day, the Lord came down in smoke, visited them on Sinai, and gave the law. So this is kind of like a, hey, didn't work the first time, so let's try it again. So Moses is down the mount to deal with the people, and on the third day, he's back up the mount for 40 days. We read about this in Exodus 34. So Exodus 32 and 33, we're down the mount dealing with people. In Exodus 34, he's back up the mount. Exodus 34, 28. And he was there with the Lord 40 days and 40 nights. Neither did he neither eat bread nor drink water. He wrote upon the tables the words of the covenant, the 10 commandments. And it came to pass when Moses came down from the Mount Sinai with the 2 tables of testimony in Moses' hand, when he came down from the mount, that Moses wist not the skin of his face shone while he talked with the people. And that's what this highlight here is. And this is a preview of the Transfiguration. Remember that when Jesus was in the Transfiguration, Moses and Elijah appeared with him. Moses came down from having been in the glory of God, and his face shone so much that he had to keep it covered with a veil. The people could not look upon him. This is a preview of not only the Transfiguration in which he appeared with Christ, but also the time when you insert the numbers back into this timeline, which we're not there yet to do. But when you do that, you will find that that is the precise period of time where Christ was glorified. So that's a foreshadow in a couple of different ways. It's previewing the Transfiguration where Moses would appear, and the glorification of Christ in that precise point in time in history. Regardless, after the second period of time, Moses came down the mountain with the tables of stone. The very next chapter, chapters Exodus 35 through 40, is the willful offering for implements, instruments, and construction materials to build the tabernacle in the wilderness, which they did. And it signifies the time in which they wandered in the wilderness. 40 years they wandered in the wilderness. And that goes back to the Numbers 14, I don't have it up anymore. That goes back to the Numbers 14 verse that told us that the reason they were given 40 years to wander in the wilderness was the judgment for the number of days they were sinful. So, after they wandered 40 years in the wilderness, what did they do? They came up out of the Jordan on the 10th day of the first month and camped in Gilgal in the east border of Jericho. They entered their promised land. There was a 7-year conquest for the land of Canaan, after which the land rested from war, and the lots were parceled to the tribes. So I wanted to give this, I don't have the extra 7 years on here, but this is a preview. It's on a preview. It is a type and shadow overlay, a precise type and shadow overlay from creation to kingdom from the pattern in the mount. So let's actually close this, and we will go back to this chart that I actually love most of all. And there is up here the same information, but I have the extra 7 years up here. It's color coded. So this is my favorite chart. And this is where we will end this study. Because I wanted to show you that yes, 70, why 70? Because of the context of Daniel. But also it comes to fruition in the periods of 40, which have that 70 in there. But more specifically, probably the periods of 40 make a little bit more sense. There's another piece of this that I want to explain, though, and it has to do with what 40 represents, which I asked earlier for you guys to ponder. 40 is a period of trying and of testing. So here's the color coding and the same thing that I just showed you. The giving of the law on Sinai. 40 days Moses was up the mount. At the end of the 40 days, he was instructed to come back down because the people were causing a stir. 2 days down the mountain to deal with the people. So in the same likeness of having gone up there to begin with, to receive the law, he's ready against the third day. He goes up there for a second period of 40, after which he comes down with the tables of stone, and his face is shining like the sun, previewing the glorification of Christ, the transfiguration of Christ, which was transfiguration was a preview of the glorification also. But Moses, like I said, he appeared with Christ in that transfiguration. And then after that second period of 40, when he was down the mount, they were wandering in the wilderness for 40 years before they got to enter their promised land. And then there was that 7-year conquest for the land, after which the land rested from war, and there was a parceling of the lots to the tribes in that promised land. What we look at from type and shadow here is, this is where the Jubilees start. So from here, 1406 to 2025, there are 70. But when we actually look at we plug the years back in, and we look at the time period when Christ came. Christ had his ministry in this period of Jubilee years, from 16 AD to 65 AD. His ministry actually began down here on Tishri 10 of 28 AD and ended on Nisan 10 of 32 AD. So this was the year in which Christ had his ministry. His ministry included those 3.5 years from Tishri 10 of 28 AD to Nisan 10 of 32 AD. And then 4 days later he died, and 3 days later he rose in glory. 40 days after that he ascended. His ascension was IR 26 of 32 AD. This signals the period of 40 jubilees, 40 exact jubilees from when Christ left to when he will come again for his church. This is our period of trying and testing without him. What did Jesus say in John 16:33? Open to John 18. These things I have spoken unto you, that in me ye might have peace. In the world ye shall have tribulation, but be of good cheer. I have overcome the world. Very literally, this is our 40 Jubilee years of trying and testing. It is the time when we are absent our Messiah. At the conclusion of that 40 Jubilee years, he will come back and we will no longer be without him. This is the rapture of the church and the commencement of Daniel's 70th week. Daniel's 70th week is the 7-year conquest for the land of Canaan, after which the land will rest from war because Jesus will bring that war to an end by defeating everyone and burning the earth and the works thereof in fire. He will remake the heavens and the earth to go into the kingdom. Yes, it is remade twice. And then there will be that 1,000-year kingdom. But the lands will rest from war, and the lots will be parceled to the tribes in the kingdom once again. The events of Ezekiel's end times vision are a precise overlay of the book of Joshua, where you have a benchmark event which begins a count. Israel entered the promised land in Joshua 4, and there was a 7-year conquest for the land of Canaan until Joshua 11. Then the land rested from war. Joshua 12 is a recounting of the victories that they had, and Joshua 13 is a parceling of the lots to the tribes. Ezekiel's end times vision is an event that begins a count, the building of his temple, that leads to a 7-year conquest for the land, after which the land rests from war. The 6th and final purpose for the 70 week is accomplished in chapter 43 with the anointing of the Most Holy. And then the lots are parceled to the tribes in the kingdom, which is the end of that vision in Ezekiel 48. I wrote about this in the Jubilee and Ezekiel's temple, how Ezekiel's end times vision is a precise overlay of the events of Joshua. And from the giving of the law to the parceling of the lots to the tribe, Exodus 19 to Joshua 13 is a precise overlay and type and shadow of world history from creation to kingdom. And when you plug the actual years back in, from the time that Christ ascended to the time that Christ returns will be our period of 40, trial and testing, when he will come back for us at the end of that, and we shall be with him forever after that point. So I wanted to go through this chart. This is actually kind of a culmination of several, but this is why the color coding here. There are not 50 jubilees per 50 years per jubilee cycle. There are plus or minus 49 to get to the 50th year. There are not 120. There are 123. And there are not 6,000 years of world history. There are 6,034. What you will see is that there are 4,000 from creation to Jesus becoming the Nazarene, the branch, which he was prophesied to be to do certain things. From the time Jesus assumed the role of the branch to the time that he ascended is 34 years. And from the time that he ascended to the time that he will return is 2,000. 6,000 absents the life of Christ, the intervention of God in the affairs of mankind via the first coming of Christ. That is taken out of the equation when people say 6,000. No, it is 6,034 because that includes the life of Christ. If there are any questions at all, please let me know. I know I went through a lot of information, but this is our double check system to the 70. Why 70? Because Daniel, but more specifically, why 40 since Christ? Because John 16:33. Have a great night.